You'd be hard-pressed to discuss anti-feminism or men's issues here in the UK without hearing our next speaker's name. He is the leader of the only political party in the English-speaking world to actively campaign for men's issues. He puts himself on the front line day in and day out, hurling himself in front of London's traffic, all in the name of men and boys. Does he really need an introduction? It's Mike Buchanan.
One of the key themes of the 4th International Conference on Men's Issues, which we hosted in London in July, was equal rights for men and women. And it's only when you look at the detail of how men's and women's human rights play out in Britain today, an issue we explored at great length in our 2015 election manifesto, a mere 80 pages long. It was originally double that size, by the way. But you're then forced to accept that women and girls belong to a deeply privileged class in Britain today, while men and boys belong to a deeply disadvantaged class. But regardless of the amazing materials which have been posted online over many, many years, regardless of the countless rational arguments on men's and boys' issues, regardless of the relentless debunking of feminist narratives, we're seeing ever more privileging of women and girls with each passing year, and therefore, inevitably, more disadvantaging of men and boys. Ignoring the online world, feminists are wielding ever more influence, either directly or through manipulating and shaming men in positions of power with each year that passes. And a recent small indicator of the contempt that the state has for men and boys was the limiting of the debate commemorating International Men's Day this year to just 30 minutes next Friday. And there's a very busy timetable next Friday in the Chamber of the House of Commons, and I'd put money on it not even happening. Now, the average age of an audience member here today, I think, is probably a few years younger than the average age of the audience members at international conferences, possibly due in part to the much lower ticket price. Now, the age gap's important because the younger a man you are, the more years you'll risk suffering the state's assaults on your human rights, perhaps even to the point of causing you to consider suicide, which remains the #1 cause of death in Britain of men in all age groups under 45. And almost all the causes of the reactive depression which leads men to take their own lives are attributable to the state's actions and inactions. Now, we have a number of university students in the audience today. Really good to see Will here. And I'd like to address the male students directly. I'd like you, to invite you to be among the first generation of students to actively promote men's rights, along with Will and others, on campus. And that, to my mind, inevitably includes challenging the evil ideology of feminism. I don't think that can be avoided. Frankly, if you try and avoid criticizing feminism, it's all, there's not much point. Feminism will impact gravely on many of your lives, whether it's through denial of employment or promotion because of positive discrimination for women, a consequent failure to attract a partner, a lack of support if you're a victim of domestic violence, punitive financial settlements in the divorce courts, denial of access to your children by the family courts, or one of a host of other problems you're likely to face on account of your sex alone. But like most men, young men are optimistic that they'll dodge the bullets, and like most men, they're astonished to find that they don't. It's time, I think, for male students to launch or join men's groups. And I'll say to you, if your student union won't authorize your groups, tell them to stick their objections where the sun doesn't shine, and launch your groups anyway. It's time for male students, along with men in general, to get off their knees and strap on a pair. I believe there are far more male students in universities today who are sympathetic to the viewpoints being expressed today than even most of us here would believe. And there exists an excellent way to get in touch with one another. And so I think it's 2 or 3 years old now, Network for Men. And the following is from their website. Are you concerned about the rights of men and boys and the state of gender relations in society? Do you want to participate and become part of the solution? Network for Men exists so you can find others who share your concern, meet with others who want to be a part of the solution. The network can help you contact or form local groups of men who meet for friendship, shared learning and activism. Network for Men is not a membership organisation and it has no leaders. There is no cost. We ask those who meet through the network to commit to ethical guidelines, and those guidelines are on the website through a link. Contact the admin team in confidence with your details, and where possible, they will ask a representative from a local group to contact you. Your information will only be held for this purpose. And end of extract. It would be great to see groups of men brought into contact through Network for Men in every university in the UK and Ireland. That would be really something. I think there's also a need for consciousness building and challenging feminists through acts which would entail little cost, effort or risk, such as posting materials on notice boards. And if you just give me a second. Thanks to the man who bought me a Guinness earlier. I should say at this point.
You lied, it was water.
He did. Materials on notice board, posters. I guess social sciences and history and philosophy and gender studies departments would be obvious targets. The places for posting materials are limited only by your imaginations. On notice boards, on the office doors of gender studies professors, on doors and walls in gents' toilets. I can't believe I said that. It's just like an obvious place, isn't it, guys? Outside bedroom doors, in halls of residence and other places. One obvious notice would be to invite men to meet through Network for Men. Another would be the non-feminist declaration, which we have on a number of placards here today, and it's on the reverse of one of the leaflets on your chairs. It's available online as a downloadable PDF. Now, a considerable amount of time and effort went into the drafting of the non-feminist declaration, and I'd like to read it to you now. Feminists attack liberty, justice, equality, and meritocracy. They attack men, women, and children, and relations between the sexes. All feminist narratives have been shown to be demonstrably one or more of the following: baseless conspiracy theories, fantasies, lies, delusions, and myths. Every one of them. In many countries, virtually all institutions have been deeply corrupted by feminists and by people in positions of power bowing to feminist influence. These include governments, public sectors, the media, family courts, education systems, academia, police forces, criminal justice systems, health services, military forces, and business sectors. It's bloody well everything, quite frankly. There are no major areas, certainly of the public sector, which are not very deeply infiltrated by radical feminists today. Feminists have been responsible for or have exacerbated many of the problems facing humanity today. These include disparities in the treatment, opportunities, choices, respect, protections and rights afforded to citizens. Non-feminist men and women constitute a sizable majority of the global population. Feminist hegemony therefore has no legitimacy, operating without the consent of the majority of citizens, many of whom suffer egregiously as a result of feminist actions. Feminists have long cultivated a culture of fear. Non-feminist men and women have been reluctant to publicly challenge feminist narratives and actions. We reject that culture, resolving to speak the truth at all times and encouraging others to do the same. Individual feminists must be held publicly accountable for their actions. Let's start with Alison Saunders, shall we? Recognizing the growth of feminist aggression, we assert our right to exist and thrive without paying any respect to feminists or their ideology. We shall not permit feminists to dictate what we say, how we say it, or how we interact with the world. Given the extent of feminist entrenchment in institutions, we recognize that we are embarking on a project that may last for decades. But we shall not waver in our determination to roll back feminist influence over state and other institutions. With this declaration, we take a public stance in opposition to feminism and invite others to join us. Thank you. End of declaration. Thank you. Thank you. Now, it's been almost 5 years since Swaina Pai and I were in a debate at Durham University with the delightful Julie Bindel and another feminist by the unlikely name of Cindy Gallop. We were reliably informed that women from the Durham University Feminist Society, DUFS, they were known as duffers to non-members, I was pleased to learn, had planned to picket the event, but eventually decided not to, because it was a bit chilly and light rain was forecast. They used to be tougher in the 60s, that's what I can say. My party is very keen to do more to support men and women at universities, both students and academics, who wish to raise awareness of issues affecting men and boys and challenge feminism and feminists. Elizabeth Hobson is, as I'm sure you know, our Director of Communications, and we're both willing and hopeful of meeting with students and academics, giving presentations, engaging in debates at universities in the UK, and the party will cover our related costs. One of the most welcome developments in recent years has been the increasing number of women willing to publicly criticise feminism and to self-identify as non-feminists or, even better, as anti-feminists. They understand that feminists are the enemies of most women, as well as the enemies of men and the nuclear family, and therefore the enemies of children too. So apart from men, women and children, they're fine. A survey published by the Fawcett Society, a feminist charity, almost 3 years ago, found that only 9% of British women identify as feminists, while 4% of British men did. The charity's wonderfully named chief executive, Sam Smethers, was quoted in the Daily Telegraph as follows: "The overwhelming majority of the public share our feminist values, but don't identify with the label. However, the simple truth is, if you want a more equal society for women and men, then you are, in fact, a feminist." One for Orwellian to the extreme there. End of quote. Increasingly, I believe that women's happiness will do more to end the evil ideology of feminism as a political force than the suffering of men. I've got a simple question for women who I think face a stark choice as a class. Do you want to support women as a class exerting ever more formal power over men, or do you want personal happiness? Feminists, of course, get bitter satisfaction from women wielding ever more power over men. But here's a paradox. While women as a class have exerted ever more formal power over men in recent decades, all the studies of which I'm aware show them to have become more unhappy, more anxious, more depressed. Why would women want that direction of travel to continue? Normal women, and I exclude feminists by definition, want balance in their lives. Nobody should have been surprised by preference theory, a term coined by the British sociologist Dr. Catherine Hackim, to describe an issue she researched and published a paper about in the year 2000. Her research showed that a number of European countries, her research covered a number of European countries, and she found similar results across them. In the UK, while 4 in 7 British men were work-centred, only 1 in 7 British women were. And this work ethic gender gap, about which we never hear anything in the mainstream media, accounts for most of the gender gaps that we see in organisations where more men than women work at senior and more demanding levels. There must be vast numbers of women in their 20s, 30s and 40s deeply unhappy at finding themselves with no partner, no children, and poor prospects of either. To feminists, at least, these women, most of them in paid employment, are successes. But the women know they've become wage slaves at the cost of their personal happiness. It's time, I think, for women as a class to up their game and tell feminists in no uncertain terms, and publicly, that they don't represent women as a class. Of course, there are great websites such as Women Against Feminism, but sadly they have no impact on the feminists manipulating organisations to deliver agendas guaranteed to make women unhappy, never mind men and children. So I'm a deep admirer of women who publicly criticise feminism, some of whom self-identify as anti-feminists, which I think takes huge character and courage. The next International Women's Day is on Friday the 8th of March, and Elizabeth Hobson has come up with the excellent idea of perhaps holding protests, because why should International Women's Day be a monopoly of feminists? So we might just see the first women's anti-feminism protest in Parliament Square. Now, I don't think it'll take a lot of women on such a protest to attract mainstream media attention and publicity, while the same media would utterly ignore a protest by 1,000 male anti-feminists. A few words about an award-winning film about male genital mutilation. You know I talk about that in every talk. It's called American Circumcision, and it was screened for the first time outside the US during our London conference in July. It was very well received, and we've come to a commercial agreement with Brendan Marotta, the director, to fund further screenings in the UK. So if you can provide a room, a projector, and even a modest audience, I'll travel to you, maybe give a short introduction, and try to answer any questions people might have afterwards. And my contact details are on the J4MB website. And finally, I'd like to thank Natty Raymond and Elizabeth Hobson and others for laying on this event today. And also Tom for the video. He just went, for those of you who didn't. He always does a great job. He's filmed and edited the last 3 international conferences on men's issues, and I'm hoping he'll film and edit the next one in North America next year. We'll double your money again, Tom. He's on the same rate as all of us. Okay. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.